Greetings, men of 222. It's great to be with you today. We're continuing our Common Men, Uncommon Stories series, and today we're going to talk about Caleb, who is one of my favorite characters in the entire Bible. I suppose to some degree that's true because it's one of my heroes, Pastor Ed Jackson. It's one of his favorite biblical heroes. You know, he used to see himself in relationship to Pastor Jim. He used to see Jim as Joshua and himself as Caleb, his sidekick. And that was always really great to talk with him about Caleb. Now, Caleb was really proactive. He was a man of action. He rejected passivity, and he was unwavering, not to mention that he was an incredible man of faith. What a man this guy was. His character and his passion are perhaps best summed up in Joshua 14 and 12, which says this in the New King James Version. It says, well, I need to express this a little bit. Caleb had gone to Joshua and he was asking for some land. And he said, now, therefore, give me this mountain of which the Lord spoke in that day. For you heard in the day how the Anakim was there, and that the cities were great and fortified. Well, it may be that the Lord will be with me, and I shall be able to drive them out as the Lord said. Give me that mountain. You know, as a coach, you just love a player who just, when you give them an assignment, they just say, okay, let me do it for you, coach. Let me do it. And that's exactly what Caleb was. What a player. Notice, though, that even Caleb did not have an absolute assurance that God would drive them out for him. He says, if the Lord will be with me, he's smart enough to understand that yes, they're going to inherit the land, but he doesn't know precisely how the Lord's going to take care of that. But he says, if the Lord will be with me, I shall be able to drive them out of the land. Now, even he knew that God had commanded this outcome, that Caleb's tribe, that is the tribe of Judah, would get that land. But he wasn't just absolutely sure how it was going to happen, but his response was, give me that mountain. I'm going to take it for you, Lord. What is the story then of Caleb? Well, we first hear of Caleb in Numbers 13 and 6, where it tells us that Caleb was the one chosen from the tribe of Judah when the spies were sent out. You remember, we know that in Numbers 13 and 2, it talks about how the spies are going to be sent out. One leader from each tribe. Notice, leader. So we know that Caleb was a leader because in Numbers 13 and 2 it says, you shall send men from each of their father's tribes, every one a leader among them. So this guy was he may have been Joshua's sidekick, but he was no shrinking violet. This was not an administrative assistant. This was a guy who in his own right was a man of action, a man that was to be admired. And as most of you know, God had said in Joshua 13 and 2, he was going to give the land to the sons of Israel. And he told them to send out these 12 spies, one from each tribe, to scout out the land. So that was their responsibility. And Moses said, see what the land is like and whether the people who live in it are strong or weak, whether they are few or many. Now, I don't know absolutely why Moses sent them out, because he'd been directed by God, I suppose. But look, God was going to give them that land. Yet Moses was smart. He was making a plan, and he sent these guys out, 12 of them, to come back and to report whether the people who lived there were strong or weak, whether they were few or many. So the spies went out and they spied out the land for 40 days. And when they came back, they described it as a land flowing with milk and honey. Clearly, just a great land that was just fertile and great things were growing there. And it was just a wonderful place. Well, they also said, but the people were strong and the cities were fortified. And as the spies were explaining the difficulties, imagine, here you go, you got 12 guys come back and they start talking to the congregation, so to speak, and they say, well, man, this is really great. It's flowing with milk and honey. And then the guys that are the naysayers start saying, well, but they're strong and the cities are fortified, and the people start talking. And then all of a sudden, Caleb speaks up. He speaks up, and here's what he says. We should by all means go up and take possession of it, for we shall surely overcome. There was no question in his mind, and he was trying to direct the people appropriately. He stood up. He was proactive. He was not a shrinking violet. But the people were so scared that not only did they not want to go into the land, they wanted to go back to Egypt. They wanted to go back and be slaves again. Well, Joshua and Caleb tore their clothes, a sign of anguish, because they just couldn't believe that the people of Israel spoke that way. And they spoke to the people of Israel and they said, the land we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel. Look, only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. In other words, we're going to eat their lunch. Not fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them, because God is on our side, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. Well, in verse 10, the congregation's response was to pick up stones and to begin, they were going to stone Moses. Oh my goodness. And probably Joshua and Caleb too, by the way. So God spoke up and said that the people would not go into the promised land, but that they would wander in the wilderness for 40 years, one day for each day of the scouting. Sometimes we forget why they were wandering. They were wandering because God had told them they had the land and they chose not to obey him. The exceptions, of course, were Joshua and Caleb. And God said this of Caleb in Numbers 14 and 24. He said, but my servant Caleb, because he had a different spirit in him and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land where he went, and his descendants shall inherit it. You see, God said of Caleb, this man was faithful, and he will come into the land, and he will inherit that land that he scouted out. This is a precursor of Hebrews 11:6, isn't it? Which says, without faith it is impossible to please God, for he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. Must believe that Caleb did. Caleb certainly had that faith. Well, when Caleb went to spy out the land, he was 40 years old, the prime of life, if you will. So by the time the wandering was done, he was 80. But in Joshua 14, verses 8 through 12, we read how the other spies had failed God and what happened to Caleb after the wandering. And it said, nevertheless, my brethren, who went up with me, made the heart of the people melt. In other words, the other 10 guys made them scared. But I wholly followed the Lord my God. So Moses swore on that day, saying, surely the land where your foot has trodden shall be your inheritance and your children's forever, because you have wholly followed the Lord my God. And now, now the Lord my God has kept me alive. And he said, these 45 years, ever since the Lord spoke this word to Moses, while Israel wandered in the wilderness, and now, here I am this day, 85 years old. 85 years old. And yet I am as strong this day as on the day that Moses sent me, just as my strength was then, so now is my strength for war, both for going out, for coming in. Now therefore, give me this mountain, of which the Lord spoke in that day. For you heard in that day how the Anakim were there, and the cities were great and fortified. Now, by the way, the Anakim were giants descended from the Nephilim in Genesis 6. So these were big dudes. But nevertheless, he said, for you heard in the day how the Anakim were there, and the cities were great and fortified. It may be that the Lord will be with me, and I shall be able to drive them out, as the Lord said. Caleb could not be completely sure that that's the way the Lord was going to make it happen, but he believed God, whereas others, unlike Joshua and Caleb, were the only two guys. By the way, did you know that the tribe of Judah is the tribe from which Jesus came? Caleb was an ancestor of Jesus Christ. So what are the takeaways from Caleb's story? Well, first and foremost, we know that he was a man of discernment when he brought back his positive report. He could see that it was a great land, and he could depend upon the fact that the Lord said that they were going to get that land. So his conclusion was, let's go. Let's go right now. Secondly, we know he was a leader, and leaders are men of action, not afraid to take a calculated risk. You know, too often in our society, guys who claim to be leaders just are couch potatoes. They're unwilling to ever try anything. And I think part of that is there is an assumption they make that if they do something and it's wrong, it's fatal. That's not true. Great leaders are people who make decisions based on the information that they have right now. And if that information changes, then they make another decision. That's leadership. That's action. While others were afraid, Caleb rejected passivity, didn't he? And he counseled that the Israelites should take the promised land. He was proactive. Give me that mountain. He was unwavering, knowing that God had promised and he could bank on that promise. Lastly, by claiming the land, he was able to leave a good legacy, wasn't he? As a man of faith to his family. Caleb was the kind of man who left a great legacy for his children, grandchildren, and his descendants. Let's learn from this. Be intentional this week as you honor Jesus. See you next Saturday, Lord willing, and the creeks don't rise.